School. I came from a public school. A public school in Britain is what you call a private school in America. Churchill once said that the British and American peoples, the two peoples, divided by a common language. You think you speak English, or we think you speak English, and you don't. It sounds like English, but it's totally different meanings.
Like the word homely.
Like the word
homely.
Homely, yeah.
The time when you went out to dinner.
I forgot about that. Homely, yes. I forgot about that. Remind me of the story.
Well, the story was that we went out to dinner with an American couple, and they were having a nice dinner together, and so he was trying to compliment the wife of the guest, and he said, "Oh, your wife is so homely, you know." And she was, what? Oh, she's really homely. What?
Not many people as homely as that, yes. I'm talking about that story, yes. I've got other stories like that. So we went to a public school or private school. It's as old as America almost. That's a bit older, 1470, I think they were founded. Not like most schools in England, 1470. And there was a school, there was an oak tree outside our window. The oak tree was charred. It was the tree which centuries of martyrs had been burnt to the pious chants of the onlookers. They were burnt either because they were Catholic and they refused to become Protestant, or they were Catholic, or they were Protestant and refused to become Catholic. I'm not sure. I know our school was almost entirely Protestant. We had one Catholic boy, whose name was Murray. He had to wait outside the chapel when the rest of us normal boys went into, and he was waiting outside. That's how it was. So I knew there's this boy Murray. The headmaster, he was a very fine English headmaster. Again, different language. You call them a principal, a school principal. His name was Charles Allison. He was headmaster throughout the time that I was there. He came into our class one day. Our teacher hadn't turned up, so he came in with a bundle of newspaper under one arm. He bought all that day's 8 or 10 national newspapers, and he said, "Today I'm going to teach you boys about how newspapers lie, depending on their colour." So he spread out all these newspapers, picked on the same story in all these 8 or 10 newspapers in order to educate us as to how newspaper stories could lie. And how they would subtly change the story, change the victims or whatever it was, change the language used to make it. And this is very shocking. When you're growing up, you assume that everything in print is true. You've been taught that everything in print is true in black and white. It's in a newspaper, therefore it's the truth.
What age were you?
I would have been, at the time I was at school. I was in a senior school, so I would have been 8 or 10. 8 or 10
Wow.
When he came and told me that. My mother said the same thing. I mean, years went on, and after a time I started collecting newspaper clippings. Newspaper cuttings. I would cut out the clippings from newspapers and I'd paste them into big books, big format books. All the big murder. In England, murders are very rare. We had 4 or 5 murders every year, perhaps, because the penalty was always extreme. And every time the murder was a hue and cry until they caught the man who'd done it, or the woman, of course. We had to be absolutely impartial about this. So man or woman who had carried out the murder. My mother must have thought to see me collecting press clippings on murder case, the John George Haigh murder case. He was John George Haigh. He'd been responsible for 12 murders. He'd cut up all the victims and he'd dissolved their bodies in acid. Grisly, very grisly, very technical story too. So I cut out all the clippings and pasted them into clippings books. And I kept all the clippings books throughout my life. I had all the clippings books until just about 2002, and when all my property was seized, including all my clippings books. And everything was seized, taken off me. But what my mother must have thought at that time, I don't know. She didn't mention it to me. I remember thinking one case, there was a murder case involving Joan Woodhouse, the Joan Woodhouse murder case. She was arrested. No, she wasn't arrested. She was the victim. She had been murdered in the grounds of Arundel Castle. And the newspapers are full of Joan Woodhouse. I can see her very nice little kind of English schoolgirl. There she is, 23 or something like that. She was murdered and found dead in the grounds of Arundel Castle. And all the newspapers followed it for a whole week, and then suddenly the story suddenly vanished. And I thought that Joan Woodhouse was never going to be one of those forgotten names. She'd go vanish into history, Joan Woodhouse. Until last year, Joan Woodhouse was suddenly in the newspapers again, after all these years.
Wow.
Somebody had written a book about the Joan Woodhouse murder case. Joan Woodhouse, that followed out the fact that she was found dead in the grounds of Arundel Castle, which is the traditional home of the Duke of Norfolk, a member of the royal family, and that the police suspect, the man who had been arrested by the police and was subsequently released, had been maintained in his defence, and eventually he was acquitted. And the mystery was who had paid for his defence. This author of this book then discovered that the payments had been made by the Duke of Arundel, the Duke of Norfolk himself. So that was the reason why everything was hushed. And then right about the same time, there was another press story followed by the newspapers. Day after day, following up the stories of the flying Enterprise, a great a Norwegian freighter as it battled across the North Sea from Norway to Scotland, gradually sinking. The whole crew is taken off the sinking ship, sinking by the stern, and only the captain stayed on deck. And there he is waving to the passing planes. There's photographs of him in all the newspapers next day, and his name is Captain Carlson. Remember, this is called out, in fact, by a member of my audience in London 2 months ago. Yes, he'd followed the case too. The Flying Enterprise, Captain Carlson. I mean, that captain's name was Captain Carlson. I said, yes, thank you, Captain Carlson. Yes, so it was. And my mother saying to me at the time, why are the newspapers doing this? What are they trying to cover up? What are they trying to distract attention from? My mother, a very simple person, but she's saying to her children, what are they covering up? The government. And I thought, the government covering up. Governments can't cover up things. Governments can't cover up things. But of course, Tony Blair, our Prime Minister at the time of September the 11th, 2001, he issued a famous memorandum on that date, September the 11th. Today would be a good day to bury bad news, he said. Oh yes, a good day to bury. If any of his ministers had bad news that they wanted to broadcast, now was a good time to broadcast it, because the entire public's attention was transfixed by what's happening in America. Today would be a good day to bury bad news. Well, the same, in fact, of course, the day about 2 weeks ago, when you had this little minor event down in Alexandria, some baseball game was being disrupted by one sole gunman. Nobody was hurt, nobody was killed except the gunman himself, and that was a non-story. And the American television filled with this one story, hour after hour after hour. And I'm watching this, think to myself, what are the Americans trying to distract attention from? This complete non-story going on hour after hour. Well, meanwhile in London, that same day, there's been this tower block set on fire, and 100 civilians have been burned alive in the tower block, in the heart of London, the Greffin Tower block, the Grenfell Tower block, right across the street from where my daughter lives, in fact. She was living there, and she heard the noise of the fire engines, and she sees this block just across the street going up in flames. Horrible, horrible sight. 27 floors straight up. This building being set on fire, and she says she'll never forget the screams from the upper floors. Hundreds of people screaming for their lives, of course, being burned to death. And she stood there watching it for hours. She's traumatized by it. She sent me an email the following morning at 7 o'clock saying there's been a terrible fire. And America was transfixed on something totally different. 2 days before the American newspapers noticed what had happened in London. So Charles Allison was our headmaster at that time. And it's an example to me that you have to be careful what you're being taught and careful how they're telling you, because you'll find out later on there's something completely different, and the newspapers have covered it up. It was a great public school. The whole this public school would march down Brentwood High Street, Brentwood School. We marched down Brentwood High Street to the local Odeon to see films about British heroism in the 1940s, 1950s. Films like Scott of the Antarctic, that film, Scott of the Antarctic, that was made with John Mills as the principal actor. John Mills, he was a principal film star, and he played the part of Captain Scott, who heads this ill-fated attempt to reach the South Pole, Scott of the Antarctic, and he gets almost to the South Pole and then turns around and comes back, desperately sick, and all his men getting sicker and sicker. And Captain Oates is no English schoolboy, doesn't know the story of Captain Oates, an army supernumerary who realizes now he's become an encumbrance on the rest of the team. And so that one night, in a blizzard, he goes to the door of his tent, opens the flaps and steps out into the darkness outside and turns around bravely and says to his men, he says, "I'm just going for a short walk. I'm going for a short walk. I may be gone some time." Every English schoolboy knows these things. It's kind of, I mean, nowadays you'll be marching down Brentwood High Street to see a film about Oscar Schindler or something like that, a film about hatred. They stopped showing films about British heroism now. Films about hatred. And the music of in that film, also Scott of the Antarctic, was composed by a Welshman, Ralph Vaughan Williams. He's a very famous composer, Ralph Vaughan Williams.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think I've heard that name.
Well, he pronounces his name Ralph Vaughan Williams. And he was white haired. I saw him. He came to speak to us boys in the school once. He came from Wales to speak to us boys, and we sat there, 500 or 600 boys, with our parents, venerating this elderly gentleman who telling us how he composes music, great music. And his music is the most popular music in England at present. There's a piece called "The Lark Ascending," which he composed, which is the most popular piece in the annual competition. I used to go and speak myself at that school years later. I went to speak to the school, the sixth formers, because I was a very popular speaker. I was somebody, I knew all Hitler's private staff. I knew Hitler's private staff, I knew Churchill's private staff, I knew a lot of the generals and people like that, and so I lived to spin an interesting story to them, and they listened rapt and enthusiastic until one day I was informed by the history teacher, Mr. Irving, I'm terribly sorry to inform you, we are no longer allowed to invite you. And I say, "No, you're not allowed to invite me?" He said, "Yes, a parent has complained." No names, we don't know what the name was, we can suspect what kind of name it was, but a parent had complained, and so I was forthwith no longer invited to speak at Brentwood School. It's kind of an early sign that things are not right, that your face doesn't fit, and you're not wanted, you're not welcome. That was back about 20 years ago.
How many years ago?
20 years ago, I think. Yes. And the same thing happened when the Dresden book was published. I'll tell you that. I went on to university and to change from the arts course to studying just pure languages and things like that. There was a one-year course at university to enable you to change over into a science degree. So they gave you 1 year to catch up from nothing, from zero to university standard in mathematics and chemistry and physics. And I did that and moved into university course. So I've got a very shallow, very broad knowledge. It's very useful for being a writer. I've shaken a lot of hands in my time. I've shaken the hands of a lot of physicists. I can never say that word. Physicists, physicists, and chemists, and in fact, I've shaken a very great deal of hands in my lifetime over the last 5 or 6 decades, writing these history books. I've shaken the hands of a lot of people. If you're a historian, you're entitled to go up and ring their front doorbell and say, I'm a historian, good evening, can I come have a chat with you? And you walk away with the heads of the cells of a great many people stuck to your hands, Adolf Hitler's staff. And I mean, in his time, they would have shaken Adolf Hitler's hand, they never shook my hand. So actually quite a few of their cells. In fact, I've advised people when they leave, if they've shaken my hand, then to bag their hand. one of the people I met was Otto Hahn. Otto Hahn, he was, I mean, like Werner Heisenberg, all these famous names, Otto Hahn, Werner Heisenberg. As when I'm writing the book, The Virus House, of which a copy there, give me a copy of The Virus House, The Virus House, The Virus, The Virus. Okay. Yes, got one copy there. Didn't copy that, yes, thank you. Otto Hahn, he was the man who discovered nuclear fission. And you would imagine that, I mean, he eventually, after the war, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for this. As Werner Heisenberg, there were lots of these German scientists who were belatedly awarded the Nobel Prize. I went to see Otto Hahn. Otto Hahn was a dear old professor, a kind of professor emeritus who was given his own office in the University of Göttingen. I went to see him. I'm very interested in dates always. I'm very keen on dates. I said, oh, what date did you make the discovery? He said, oh, date, it was 1939 sometime. I said, no, it can't have been 1939 because you published the discovery in January 1939. Yes, true, you published the discovery in January 1939, so you probably made the discovery in November or December 1938 or something. He said, how would I know? I said, well, did you keep a diary? And he said, oh, Freud Miller, his secretary, comes trotting in, he says, did I keep a diary during the war years? And I said, well, it would have been just before the war, Professor. Did I keep a diary during the 1938? She said, jawohl, Herr Professor, you'll find them down your drawer. There's a bottom drawer of your desk. And he pulls out the bottom drawer. Oh, yes, they're there. Full little pocket diaries. He brings up heaps of them, puts them on the table. He says, now, which one do you own? 1944? I said, no, 1930. 1939? I said, no, 1938. From 1938. Well, I wanted to find out what date he made the discovery because I've seen the actual bench he made the discovery on, the actual wooden bench. It's a little wooden bench in the museum on display in the museum in Munich, Deutsches Museum. A little wooden bench with a block of paraffin wax and wires coming out of it and a clockwork-driven Geiger counter and Pertrit batteries. Couple of valves. That was all he used. And he embedded a little piece of radium in the paraffin block. And embedded next to it a little piece of uranium substance. And after bombarding with neutrons from the radium all day long, then he carried out a chemical test because he's a chemist on what is left. And he found this very strange. It started just as radium and uranium, but the uranium is now split. He's now got uranium, barium, and something else. There's no explanation for it. The barium is much smaller than the uranium atom. But doesn't. I mean, he as a chemist knew straight away. He said, well, the atom is therefore split. And in 1938, the story. Every physicist knew that you couldn't split the atom. There was nothing smaller than the atom. The atom was the building block of the entire universe. But here was this fool of a chemist telling the physicists that they got it wrong, that somebody had split the atom. And you got a different substance. That's the significance of that. And he then sits at the table, reading his diary, says, begins at the beginning, I said, no, forget the early ones, read one of the later ones, begin at the back. So he sits at the back. It's December. November. He stops. He stops and he stares at a page. He's not seen that page since the actual 1938 day that he wrote it. The actual day he discovered atomic fission. There's just one line written in it. I've actually printed the page, but somewhere there. There it is. Here's the page. He's printed one line. Aufregende Radium-Barium-Versuche. Dramatic experiments with radium and barium. Dramatic experiments with radium and barium. 4 exclamation marks. 4 exclamation marks. He says, the tear is trickling down. He cannot believe that he's looking at a page which he hasn't looked at since all those years ago. Amazing. I say to him, to keep the conversation alive, I say, well, what does uranium look like? He says, well, what do you mean? What does it look like? I mean, it's a metal, isn't it? Yeah, white metal. And you can have it as a kind of black powder, yes, a heavy black powder. The gas, you can have a gas. Uranium hexafluoride, yes, you can have a gaseous form. He says, stand up and get that dictionary off the top shelf. So, reach over. It's a dictionary on the top shelf, and I pull the dictionary down. This dictionary, he says, yes, a big dictionary. I said, I know how to spell uranium. U-R-A-N, John. He says, just do as I say. And I put your hand through the hole where the dictionary was. I could feel there's a glass jar. Deep behind where the dictionary was, there's a glass jar. It's very heavy. He says, bring it down. Don't drop it, don't drop it, don't drop it. It's terrific. He says, it's terrifically explosive. There's a black powder in there. And it'll ignite immediately, it comes into contact with air, so you mustn't break it. Don't break the jar. I said, it's not only that, Professor, but the jar is warm. He said, well, it's radioactive. It's radioactive.
Wow.
He says, that's why I foiled him over. My secretary mustn't know that I got this uranium hidden up in the bookshelf. That violates all the regulations on health and safety now. If the regulations on health and safety existed back in 1939, I would never, I said 1938, I would never have been able to make the discovery. Yes.
We can break a fluorescent bulb today, and they call them the mat people.
Hazmat.
Clean it up.
Yes.
A fluorescent bulb.
Yes. And a year later, I found myself sitting on a train named the Otto Hahn Express,
Yes.
named in his honor. In Germany, they used to name trains in honor of the famous people. Otto Hahn. And I knew Werner Heisenberg. I spent a whole day talking with Werner Heisenberg. People like that. And thanks to having been to university myself and having learned sufficient physics so that I could avoid talking twaddle, and having learned German at school, I was able to speak in their own language. There was a time at school when I went to see a film called Wages of Fear. Wages of Fear. So the Americans made the film subsequently, but in fact the original French film, Le Salaire de la Peur. It's about the two truck drivers who got the job of driving 2 truckloads of 10 tons each of nitroglycerine across a bumpy South American road. Slightest jolt is going to send the sky high. You know that you sit on the edge of your seat because of this spectacle. You wonder what the storyline is, and the storyline is it's quite interesting. Two truck drivers. The film centers around. I mean, the only reason I wanted to see it because the word went around the school like wildfire. There was one scene where a woman comes out of the house and has a bath in the open air behind the house in somewhere in South America, which I thought was going to be worth seeing, but I forget if I actually saw that. What we did see with this scene of these truck drivers battling through the mountains, the highly explosive nitroglycerine, which is going to be used to snuff out the fire. And Jean-Paul Belmondo is one of the truck drivers. We spent most of the film there sitting with him in his cab, following him in the cab. I see driving the truck, and he's manfully sweating and perspiring, and the perspiration is rolling off him as he drives the truck, and he begins rolling a cigarette on the cigarette paper with the tobacco in his right hand, and he's rolling the cigarette in an open window next to him, and you're sitting there wondering what next, and what next is a colossal poof comes through the window, terrific blast of air comes through the window, pushes him to one side, blows the tobacco off his hand, and then follows 3 or 4 seconds later by a gigantic boom, which is followed 3 or 4 seconds later by the flash. They get the sequence slightly wrong, but that is the idea. It's called tipping in cinematography. You're tipping the audience that something's going to happen. Bang, flash.
Wow.
Strange.
Nitroglycerin.
Huh?
Nitroglycerin.
Nitroglycerin, yes. And the other truck is blown up, which is what causes that, 10 miles ahead.
Mm.
And you're expecting it going to happen, but if you still don't expect that to happen, I used the technique, something similar, in my book on the destruction of convoy PQ-17. Destruction of convoy PQ-17, which is a story of 38 merchant ships that sailed in convoy from Iceland to North Russia, escorted by the British Navy. The British Navy gets it wrong, the Admiralty gets it wrong. They believe the Turkish has sailed, the Turkish is going to pounce on the convoy and pick it off one by one. It orders the entire convoy escort withdrawn, the battleships, the cruisers, everything to withdraw and leave the merchant ships to their fate. 38 merchant ships, which are then picked off one by submarines and bombers. It's a very interesting story. And that's my second or third book. And I use that technique in there, and eventually the reader realizes that every time this author mentions a ship, they'll open or something like that, and he puts the tonnage in brackets, the precise tonnage in brackets after the name of the ship, then something ugly is going to happen to that ship 2 or 3 pages later. Very interesting convoy. There was Godfrey Wynne. He was a famous British journalist of Beaverbrook newspapers. He went on this convoy. Godfrey Wynne. He was a notorious British homosexual, which in England at that time was a criminal offence, and homosexuality was criminal, and he was tolerated because he was tolerated by Beaverbrook newspapers. He was one of the best journalists on the Daily Express. And they sent him to interview the captain of one of the ships, Puerto Rico, which sailed on the convoy, one of the escort ships. His name was Godfrey Wynne. And the convoy sailed on June 26, 1942, and sailed very suddenly without any warning, and he was unable to get off the ship in time. He was unable to get onto his jolly boat and get back to firm land. And so the ship sailed with him on board, took him all the way to Russia, where he spent the next 3 months of his life. So it was a misfortune, but he was a very good writer. And the reason I mentioned him is that there was an officer on one of the other ships, one of the other British Royal Navy ships. His name was Lieutenant Carradus, and he kept a diary which he sent me from New Zealand, the original diary that he wrote. He said, the diary says, July the 15th, Godfrey Wynne came on board last night. He was organising party games with the crew, and Godfrey Wynne came on board. He was very interesting. I talked with him, and somebody asked him how he'd enjoyed being the captain, the guest of the captain of the Puerto Rico, which sailed with him on board. His reply was, well, captains are heavenly, but admirals make me shy. Captains are heavenly, but admirals make me shy. So it's in the diary, so I quoted it in the book, it's in the footnote. And he wanted to sue me for libel straight away. He issued proceedings, and his solicitors after 2 or 3 said, Godfrey Wynne, Mr. Wynne, you're going to have to abandon this action because Irving has the actual man's diary, and you're going to make a fool of yourself in the British courts. So he then smarted and searched around for some alternative. But his brother was a High Court judge, which is an advantage for them to bring a libel action, Mr. Roger Wynne. The result was that I got a strange phone call from my English publisher, the publisher of the Destruction of Dresden. He telephoned me, he was very English, William Kimber. He telephoned me one morning, he says, David, I want you to come straight round to see me here in my office. And I went straight round to see him in his office. And when you went to see him, he would always be sipping some China tea, very pale China tea, from porcelain teacups with handles that were so small you couldn't manfully hook your finger through the handle. You had to kind of pinch the handle through the finger and thumb and drink tea with him. He says, David, what have you done to upset the judges? I said, nothing with it as far as that. He says, well, I was in my club last night. And when he said I was in my club, I'm afraid my mind fused. I'm thinking then she's in a gentleman's club. There's going to be females sliding up and down in poles or something like that. And this wasn't what he meant at all. He said he's in the Garrick Club or the Reform or something like that. And all the men are sitting around there on sofas, reading the Times, and talking learned stuff. And that was the kind of club he meant. He said, I was in my club last night and I heard 2 people talking about you, mentioning you by name. And as you're my author, I pricked up my ears and edged closer to them, he said, and turned around and I saw there were two High Court judges, two well-known faces. And one of them was saying to the other, this fellow Irving is an abominable cat, he's a bounder. And the other judge was saying, yes, abominable cat, you're absolutely right, there can be no compromising with Irving. I didn't know what no compromising meant at that time. I was still quite young, and you learn English as you go along. So I made a mental note. In fact, I wrote it down in my diary. I kept the diary. I found it in my diary just recently, a few months ago. I found the actual diary entry, February the 18th, 1968. There can be no compromising with Irving, he's a bounder. You're absolutely right, Roger. So it was Roger Wynne, the brother of Godfrey Wynne. You're absolutely right, Roger, and I know just the person to do it. If we can get him in the High Court in some kind of libel action, then we have some brilliant trial lawyers, for example. The trial lawyer I'd like to see handling this case would be somebody like David Hurst. David Hurst. I wrote it down, H-U-R-S-T. That was the only way I knew how to spell Hurst at that time. It's not the way he spelled his name. David Hurst is a very famous trial lawyer. He died 2 years ago. He spelled his name H-I-R-S-T. H-I-R-S-T. Yes, you're absolutely right. David Hurst would be ideal for the job. If we get him in the High Court, then I can guarantee that we can ruin David Irving's reputation, and we can destroy his reputation as a historian, and we can ruin him financially. Very interesting. I think to myself, I said, well, thank you for telling me that, Mr. Kimber. This conversation is very interesting, but I don't know what I've done to upset him. But ever since then, I thought to myself, how odd that these judges they associate as their job to ruin somebody's reputation and destroy somebody financially. It reminded my father, my father, who was, at the time, he was coming towards the end of his life, and I brought him back to London. He was writing a book on the Battle of Jutland, the great naval sea battle of Jutland. He'd been there in 1916. He was actually on one of the warships in the Battle of Jutland on May the 31st, 1916, when the German fleet came out to do battle with the British Royal Navy, and the Royal Navy went out to do battle with the German fleet, and they went at it hammer and tongs all that night, May the 31st. And victory was claimed by both sides. My father afterwards told me, well, victory always goes to the side which claims it loudest and gets in first, but with a claim. That's not the only thing he said. My father also said, David, my boy, you've got to realize English justice is the best that money can buy. That's one of his things, the best that money can buy, English justice, back in 1967. And I forgot that at that time, because at that time he wrote another book called Royal Navalese, a kind of glossary of Royal Navy slang. He said to me, he's writing that book, and I'm the Convoy PQ-17, and I'm writing the destruction of Convoy PQ-17 with my back to him, and handing the manuscript to him to read at the end of every day, and he's reading it for me, which is very helpful. And he says, David, my boy, you've got this quite wrong. When warships come into port after an action, they don't tie up. You tie up your shoelaces, you tie up your boots. Warships make fast. Warships make fast. It's the slang that they use in the Royal Navy. Warships make fast. So I kind of found everywhere I said the warships tied up, and I've changed it to making fast. It's very useful having a father who can advise you on the kind of technical details like that. So all these things gradually come to pass. By that time I'd gone to university, and I'd gone from the university to a German steelworks, and I worked for the German steelworks Thyssen, and there was an elderly steel worker there, and one evening he told me that he'd been in the air raid on Dresden. He'd actually been a survivor. He was a real Holocaust survivor, if you want. Yes. And I didn't believe him because I hadn't seen it. I'd not seen any photographs. I didn't believe the newspaper stories. I began reading the newspaper stories on the basis of what he told me, and it seemed implausible but true, possible. 130,000 people killed alive, burned alive in one night by the British, something I hadn't heard in England. But I decided to write a newspaper article, and it became actually a whole book. And the book was then published. William Kimber actually wrote to me when I began writing the book. I put an advert in the British newspapers saying that if anyone had been an airman in a particular air raid, contact me. I did the same in American newspapers. Any American airman. I did the same in the German newspapers. Any survivors who wanted to contact me. It was a kind of new way of writing history because you couldn't actually see the records at that time, the Air Force records. You couldn't, but you could actually talk to the people who had done things. That had been the story of my life. Being born in 1938, I've lived through the whole of the war year period, so to speak. I was born just a week or two after Hitler's Anschluss with Austria, the German Anschluss with Austria, and I went through the whole war years. So writing history is, I benefited then, first of all, from having the actual survivors of history. And later, as they died, then the documents became available. So I had the documents as well, which you could then go back and review what you had written at the time and get things right. One of the people who wrote to me was, several people wrote to me from England. One of them was Bomber Harris. Bomber Harris was the head of Bomber Command. He was a man who was, initially completely responsible for the area of Dresden. There's actually a photograph of me with Bomber Harris on the title page. That's me with Bomber Harris in 1961.
That caught the world's attention. That book really caught the world's attention.
It began to, you imagine there'll be problematic getting a book actually published, but I got just with one mighty bound, I leaped that because the publisher actually wrote to me saying, Mr. Irving, have you got a publisher for your first book on Dresden? I've read the article, your review in the Times, your advert in the Times. Have you got a publisher? Because I would be very, very eager to publish it myself if possible. He said, the reason for that is I've been thrown out of cocktail parties for talking about Dresden, about the crime committed. And I went to see him, and I signed up with him straight away. So with one mighty bound, I became a published author, which is normally the difficulty of most authors, finding somebody to publish their books. And I stayed with him for the next 5 or 10 years, occasionally publishing books, and occasionally went with my books to another publisher. And he was a typical English gentleman. He spoke the Queen's English. The Queen's English is the kind of English I speak. Whereas Queen's English is the kind of English that Deborah Lipstadt speaks. Deborah Lipstadt. I'll talk about Deborah Lipstadt later on. Queen's English. William Kimber was a very educated Englishman. He was in the throes of a big libel action himself at that time, 1963. He published the book Exodus by Leon Uris, which resulted in a libel action brought by the doctor who Leon Uris mentions as being the Auschwitz doctor. And there was a Pole called Dr. Daring who had been forced into working as a doctor at Auschwitz, who then sued him for libel. And Kimber every day was involved in this libel action, which was up to his ears. I went to great trouble with the Dresden book. Went to great trouble. I assumed that all authors went to the same kind of trouble. It didn't strike me as being particularly unusual, but I found 300 or 400 survivors and 200 or 300 airmen who had been taken part in it. I spoke to the English master bomber, who was in charge of the actual air raid on site. It really struck me as being a very, very educated man. He was, his name was Morris Smith. He was the editor of Flight International, a big international flight magazine. And I went to see him. And he received me in a pinstripe suit in his offices. Very educated Englishman. I showed him the photographs of what happened on the ground because I've got a lot of photographs at that time from Dresden, and they're horrible photographs. I said, did you realize what was happening 1,000 feet below you? And he had the decency to go bright pink. As he looked at the photographs, he'd never seen these photographs before. And realized, of course, that he had done it. So he was a very, very decent Englishman. Because I went to Dresden and I took trouble to find the actual photographer. His name was Fritz Hahn. Fritz Hahn, and he showed me the police pass that had been given, dated February the 25th, 1945, which is 10 days after the air raid, 13 days after the air raid. He showed me the police pass that had been given to him, which enabled him to go through the police cordons surrounding the city and take photographs at will of the horrible scenes inside. The scenes, just people, skeletons of people sitting in the backs of cars where they've been caught trying to escape. Scenes of the heaps of hundreds of bodies, 800 or 900 bodies being heaped up on funeral pyres and set fire. He gave me these photographs in black and white. And he gave me the same photographs in colour, in fact. You see the funeral pyres there. These photographs meant something. They make a big difference. William Kimber sold the book to the Sunday Telegraph, which was just opening up at that time, the Daily Telegraph Sunday newspaper. They decided to run the book for 3 weeks as a serial. And it would have been just a run-of-the-mill serial, like any other serial at that time, had it worked off for the photographs. You put the photographs in there, the heaps of bodies that have been incinerated by the British. And this helped the people that began to ask themselves questions about the war. Churchill at that time was still alive, of course. He didn't die until 2 years after that. But he didn't actually speak out at that time. Very interesting. When the book was published, of course, the book was reviewed very widely in English and American and, in fact, the world's newspapers. And all of them unanimously praised the book. They all praised the book except for one man. His name was Arthur Pottersman. Arthur Pottersman wrote a stinking review in a left-wing newspaper in England. I forget what the title was, but it was a stinking review, and it was very ad hominem. Somebody had given him a dossier. Obviously, somebody all these years had been writing a dossier on me, filling it just with everything that they knew, putting it into this dossier and making it available then to only the first journalist who now came along. And it happened again and again after that. This dossier would be produced. The fact was that Arthur Pottersman was Jewish, and that undoubtedly was the reason why he wrote the article. It was predominantly Jews from that point on. They began attacking me. I couldn't understand what the reason was until later, when you realize, of course, they see this book, this story, as being a possible rival to their own Holocaust. This is a real Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And they see it as possible being a business rival to their own Holocaust, which is why they were attacking me. As Winston Churchill once said, the world is full of the most abominable lies about me, and the abominable thing is quite a lot of them are true. Well, quite a lot of things that the Jews said about me were true, but that wasn't where they stopped. That was in April 1963. The book was published, April the 1st. April the 30th, 1963. April 1st, when my daughter, beloved Josephine, was born. God rest her soul. The end of April, the book was published. Around about November, there was somebody knocking at my door. I'd moved to a new flat in North London, Crouch End. I opened the door. My wife had gone out for a walk with Josephine, the baby, and I was in the flat by myself. I opened the door, and there was this man standing there. He says, "Oh, good morning. My name is." He gave me a name, and I've got instructions from the local telephone exchange to come and rewire your flat. All the telephones, we're going to rewire all the telephones in the building, and changing the voltage to a new voltage, 40 volts. So if you don't mind, can I come and have a look at your telephone layout? And I said, well, yes, we can have a quick look, but there's not much point coming in now because I'm just about to go out. I shall be out all afternoon, in fact. There'll be nobody here. It's foolish, you might think, but in fact I was already thinking, suppose these people are not genuine, suppose they're housebreakers, I'd like to know exactly when they're going to come and break into my house. And he went out and he spoke to his mates who were outside, and he said up on to the roof. We had a flat roof in the building at that time. And the thing was, something already ticking in my mind was the fact that he said 40 volts. And I know something about the telephone system, and it doesn't run on 40 volts. No. So as soon as he'd packed up and gone, I then picked up the phone, and I phoned the local telephone exchange, car chain telephone exchange. I said, have you sent somebody round to this address, please? And they said, no, sir, we haven't sent any engineers round. I said, thank you. As an next I telephoned the local police. I said, I think I've got burglars who are planning to come round. If I'm right, they're going to come round this afternoon because I told them the flat's going to be empty. And the police said, well, if they do come round, can you phone us again and tell us that? Yes, I remember that very clearly. I said, well, never mind, because I think I can handle it from this point on. And I went around the flat preparing the flat, hiding hammers in certain strategic places under cushions, and locking some doors, opening some windows, and so on. And just lay low, switching off everything, just lay low. Until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, knock, knock, knock on the door. It's them again. I didn't answer. About 5 minutes, knock, 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 slightly louder. I still didn't answer. Mm-hmm. Yes. So now, after a time, I can hear footsteps walking across the roof. Yes, to where the window has been left open by them. So I think it's probably now a good time to go and phone the police. And I phoned the police again. I said, remember I phoned earlier about the police, about these gentlemen. Well, we've had a change of shift at present, so we don't know. I said, well, forget it. Right, I'll handle it. And I said, at this point there was knock, knock, knock at the door. I said, well, let's just send the police run straight way around. And I went over the door and let him in. He said, oh, you're in, are you? And I said, well, yes. And I heard you knocking, but I was asleep until some time. Well, anyway, he says, just come and do what you have to do. So he picked up his bag. It contained all sorts of very odd implements and things. It contained something like metal handcuffs, which I thought was a bit odd for telephone engineers. Contained rope, contained wire, contained a badge, it contained a typical GPO kind of at work kind of sign. He walked past me straight into the sitting room, went to the telephone, took the telephone off its hook, cut through the wires, pulled the wires out of the wall. And I'm looking at him and I said, well, excuse me, but before you go any further, can I just ask who you are? Are you from a telephone exchange or not? So he said, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I'll show you my GPO card. He produced a genuine GPO card. Post office card. I said, oh. I think for a bit while I was busy about his job, and I say, well, I think I want to tell you then that I have actually asked the police to inform the police that the telephone exchange is not aware of you, and just so you are aware of the fact that, because I'm now of course possibly believing that I've made a fool of myself. He said, well, it's no problem at all. So it happened just last week. Two days ago this week, we were in a bank and just exactly the same thing. They notified the police and everything there too. Bold as brass. And he thinks a bit and he carries on. After a while he says, well, anyway, I've got to go down to the car and get a few more things. And he's talking about going down to the van and so on. So I'm about to say, well, I'm going to have to ask you to remain long enough for the police, so that you're still here when the police come. But I don't have to, because at this moment there's a thunderous knocking at the door. And I said, well, that'll be the police at the door now, if you don't mind. And I went, and he looked very ashen-faced. The police came in, and they said to me straight away, which one is the ringleader? Which is the ringleader? So I said, well, the man you call the ringleader is the chief engineer is this gentleman here. The police went over to him and said, oh, right, you got it. I said, but he's got actually a GPO card. Well, in that case, well, give me the GPO card. The man handed over the GPO card, and the priest takes it, puts his hands on it. He says, right, now what name is on this card? The man didn't know the name of his own card. So one of them was on this, just plain sailing. They were all arrested, taken away. They were brought down off the roof, all the people, all the wire and everything. And the police came back that evening, and they said it was a bit strange. They said they were Jews and on the lookout for letters proving you were in contact with Martin Bormann in South America. So I said, I burst out laughing when they said that. I said, well, if they want to speak to Martin Bormann, they should have come back sometime before May the 2nd, 1945. That's when he committed suicide. And from that moment on, I mean, they went up to the assizes. They pleaded not guilty all the way up to the assizes, and they were given criminal convictions for housebreaking and the rest. They were all Jews. His name was Gerald Gable. Gerald Gable. He's now become a leading expert on the fascist movement in Britain, and he's leading Antifa. And his sidekicks, one sidekick was called Manny Carfel, and the other one is called something David Friedman. Manny Carfel was he stayed clean for about the next 10 years, and they sent him down for arson, and he went to prison for a very lengthy term indeed. He burned down the printing works. I was involved in other escapades. Another escapade where they sent around somebody disguised as a Hungarian kind of agitator, and he wanted me to provide funds for some kind of device that was going to be placed in the headquarters of the World Jewish Congress meeting in London, all this kind of thing. And I just immediately telephoned the police as soon as they'd gone, and said these people would come round, and gave the names and descriptions, and followed the instructions of the police to meet them at a certain time, and I meet them in a public place so that I could see the police photographing them. I've had these problems ever since then. For the next 10, 20, 30 years, they've beset me. They've tried to trip me up, of course, but I'm a great believer in playing the game clean. And they've gone, if I don't quite understand why they do it. Because they just they have egg on their face every time they do it. I'm sure if you remind me, I'll further think more instances of what they've done on that, these kind of things. But it then becomes more serious when they then start interfering with my publishing. They start interfering with my meetings. I've spoken in Seattle and Portland and places like that where big, not just demonstrations, street demonstrations, but big crowds of 200 Jews then storm the actual location where I'm speaking and rip up all the books and kick things on the floor and tread them into the ground, and then within seconds, as soon as they come, within seconds they're gone. They melt into the scenery. These kind of flash mobs.
That happened in Chicago, I think, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we had in Chicago, there was a man who was, I've forgotten his name, he was a notorious hacker. Do you remember his name?
I don't know.
He was a notorious hacker. He and his brother, they're both hackers.
Mm.
Yep. And they came and invaded our meeting and smashed up the meeting, smashed up the restaurant. The restaurant after dinner for somebody standing by who tried to then take action, claiming that they'd suffered injury from the mob. These things have it's been very, very tedious, and what they've got away with. So the time came in 1992. 1992, I was then, by that time, had a life of crime writing books. Don't ask me how many books I've written. It's like saying, well, when are you going to reach Columbus? I can say, well, when I'm going to leave Cleveland, I can tell you what time I'm going to leave Cleveland. I'm going to say it's about 2 hours drive. I'm not going to say when I'm going to reach Columbus. And I'm very superstitious about things like that. So I don't know how many books. I've written about 30. But in 1992, things began to get interesting. I've written in draft the whole of the Dr. Joseph Goebbels book, the book about Dr. Joseph Goebbels, who was Hitler's propaganda minister. And I've written it all in draft. I've written the whole book in handwriting 7 or 8 times. And getting it closer and closer to the actual original documents. And at that time then, a colleague of mine then said to me, how would you like to have the Goebbels diaries? I said, I said, but the Goebbels diaries, are the Goebbels diaries actually existent? Do they exist? Oh yes, she said. She said, I've had them actually in my hand. I've had the Goebbels diaries, the original glass microfiche in my hand in Moscow, in the KGB archives. We'd always suspected the KGB had a lot of Goebbels material, but they had the entire Goebbels diaries. That was new. That was in May 1992, she told me that. And in May-June 1992, I flew to Moscow, well, I'd been before, but I flew to Moscow and asked to see the archives. They were concerned, got the address. And she said if I took enough money with me, I could persuade the Russians then to hand over the actual diaries because they didn't know what they had. The archives were desperate for money. The Soviet Union was in collapse. So I spoke with the actual archives and persuaded them. In June 1992, I had most of the diaries, and in July 1992, I had the rest of the diaries. And I remember the independent newspaper, they published a whole-page photograph on the front page of David Irving arriving at Heathrow Airport with a suitcase, carrying the Goebbels diaries. It was wonderful. But you'd think that this would be an absolute nightmare for any author. When the book is already finished, and at that point then somebody gives you the entire man's diaries. Well, it turned out that I got the story right anyway, but this was the icing on the cake. And it was wonderful icing. I then sprinkled the icing on the cake, reading the diaries and reading them, because the diaries are then complete until almost the end, until the actual kind of April 1945 is still missing. I'd actually searched in East Germany for the missing diaries using a photon magnetometer, which is kind of very advanced mine detector in the forest in Perleberg, where they're buried. We had actually a treasure map showing where they were buried, but we didn't find anything. This was kind of part of the life of a historian. So then I was able to rewrite the entire book. By May 1996, the entire book was finished. I had a good American offer. St. Martin's Press had offered me the money for it. St. Martin's Press, one of the big American publishers. And then St. Martin's Press began to tell me, Mr. Irving, we're coming under pressure, and pressure not to publish your book. These strange people, the same people as always, the Anti-Defamation League, the Jewish bodies and so on, had emerged and suddenly woken up to Dr. Goebbels' diaries were being published. And they began pushing pressure on St. Martin's Press. They said, you don't have to worry, Mr. Irving, we won't capitulate, we won't surrender. We've read your book 7 times, we have had 7 different editors, they've all given the book very, very high marks indeed, so we won't capitulate. And I thought to myself, oh yes you will. Oh yes you will. And later that month, the Washington Post telephoned me in London and said, Mr. Irving, I was suffering from pneumonia at the time, 3 or 4 days pneumonia. And the Washington Post phoned me and said, Mr. Irving, what is your response to hearing that St. Martin's Press has cancelled the contract? I said, I can't sound surprised. So that was the beginning of the end, or the beginning of, anyway, the Deborah Lipstadt intervention. Deborah Lipstadt was a Jewish, of course, professor of the Jewish religion at the University of Atlanta, Emory University. I knew who she was because I'd been to Emory in 1994, and 2 years before. I'd received a phone call from my friends in Atlanta saying, David, can you come to Atlanta immediately tomorrow because Deborah Lipstadt is speaking here in a big public meeting in Atlanta, and the newspapers say that everybody is invited and she's going to speak. It would be nice, it would be great fun to have you sitting in the audience at the back. And can you come? So I flew straight up. I was down in Key West at the time. I flew up, it was only just an hour's flight. Flew up to Atlanta. Spent the night with one of these friends and went around to that place in the morning to where the talk was going to be held. I sat quietly in the back row, nobody knowing I was there. But what I did have was 60 copies of my book on Hermann Goering. 60 copies of my Hermann Goering book. 60 paperbacks of my Hermann Goering book, just in case she should mention me. But of course, inevitably she mentioned me throughout. And at the end of when question time came, one of my friends stood up and they said, and she said, Professor Lipstadt, you occasionally mentioned this man David Irving, this Englishman. Can you tell us a bit more about this Englishman? She quite innocently then prattled on about this awful, abominable, despicable cad David Irving, and how there can be no compromising him. He's a bounder and a cad and this kind of person. And when she then finished, I then said, I rose to my feet and I said, Professor Lipstadt, perhaps you're now going to guess that I am in fact the David Irving you've been referring to throughout in your talk. And she was stunned by this. She was like a rabbit in the headlights. She didn't know what to say. I said, I've got 2 or 3 things to say. First of all, I've got a copy of my book on Hermann Goering with me just now because you said that I have no reputation and I've got no reputation among historians, but if members of your audience care to file up here after the meeting's over and they can have the Hermann Goering book, and I'll give these 60 copies free to them. 60 copies I would give away free if they turned over on the back, and I'll see what the leading American historians say about me. You can believe it or not. And I said, the other thing that worries me is something you said in your speech. You referred today to this blueprint. You say you've got a blueprint of the gas chamber in Auschwitz. She always says this. You've got a blueprint of this gas chamber in Auschwitz, and you say that this blueprint you actually possess, it shows the holes bored in the roof from outside through which the SS men poured the cyanide capsules into the chamber, into the gas chamber. Didn't you? Did you say that? Yes. I said, well, I've got $1,000 here. $1,000, which I then produced one of my. I said, I've got $1,000, which I'm going to give to you straight away as a gift. If you can produce now, either now or at any time in the immediate future, to this audience who's just lied to. Because you know that you don't have this blueprint. You know it doesn't exist. That money is completely safe, but I'll give it to you as $1,000 as a gift. This is who she begins the film with, denial. She actually has this scene in the film, except that she changes the wording very subtly. I'm not talking about something that she's told the audience, which is a lie. What I'm saying is that I'm going to give you $1,000 if you can prove that the Holocaust happened. Which is substantially different. I've actually got the video of the actual statement I make, so there's no question that I actually made the original statement. This is just the beginning of how she lies. She goes from there onwards. That was back in 1994, November 1994, speech, and she never got over that, and she's worried about that moment ever since. She issued a book in 1996 called Denying the Holocaust. Denying the Holocaust. I issued a writ that same year. It came to court in the year 2000. But in the meantime, of course, when a case like that comes to court, you go through a very interesting stage called discovery. Right? I've mentioned this several times, and the Americans who have kind of legal knowledge, they perk up when they hear the word discovery, or disclosure is now called in England. Each side is obliged to show every document they've got, whatever the word document means, they're obliged to show whatever document they've got with any relevance of the case to the other side before the trial begins. So that's what we went through at that time. In fact, I prepared for discovery for 3 years. In particular, for example, there'd been an occasion in the year 1990, just after the wall came down, in Eastern Germany. Eastern Germany was now free. You could go and visit Eastern Germany. There was a big. I spoke to 1,000 or 2,000 people in a public square in Eastern Germany in Halle, attended by BBC, the NBC, ABC, all these television news cameras filming what I said. Very interesting because when it was my turn to speak and I got up on the back of a truck and I began speaking to this crowd, almost immediately 10 or 15 people from nowhere at all kind of filed in front of the audience. Well, it's exchange. They'd obviously been hired for the job. It was happening increasingly frequently in Germany at that time. So, and I was prepared for it. These strangers began into the front row of the audience. And when I then began speaking, after no time at all, then at a signal, then they began giving the Hitler salute. shouting "Sieg Heil," and all the television news people, this kind of thing, the news cameras actually paid for it. They were the ones behind the bribing. So I was aware of this, and I was prepared for it. I then interrupted my speech. I said, "You gentlemen sitting in the front row, you are visibly young German gentlemen. You're from Germany's coming generation, and I've just spoken and told this entire audience, this entire crowd. I said that Germany's future lies in the hands of its younger generation, new generation, and you are that younger generation. And now you're coming along already with the discredited slogans of the past." So that particular thing is one thing I wanted. I wrote to all these news cameras, these BBC, the ABC, all these news corporations. Did they by any chance still have that news footage from 1990? And all were to me saying that they regretted that they had wiped it. I mention that because we now fast forward to the year 2000 and we have disclosure. And each side is entitled to see the documents of the other side, including all the videotapes and recordings, the sound recordings, anything that has any relevance on the subject in hand. And her lawyers, Mishkondareya, have written to me formally asking for access to all my tapes and diaries and things. All my diaries, I wrote 50 million words of diaries. And they're entitled to all 50 million words.
Sure.
Yeah, deliberately, because I thought to myself, these diaries here, I've got a clean conscience. If they want to read 50 million words, it's at their expense. They also have to see all my videotapes. All my videotapes. And so without any hesitation, I gave them all 122 videotapes from my list. And after 3 weeks, the videotapes came back. And I sent my secretaries. I'd had two special secretaries, two special assistants. I'd hired them months before. One was a trainee solicitor, and the other one was a trainee trial lawyer. I'd hired them especially for this. After 3 or 4 weeks, these tapes came back. And my assistant went to the front door to receive the tapes from them and came back in the office and said, "What shall I do? Shall I file them again?" I said, "Well, before you file these tapes away again, just make sure that all 122 are there, will you?" Yes. 124 tapes I'd sent back. 124, where there had only been 122 before. So they'd accidentally sent 2 of their own tapes. And guess what? Those 2 tapes were. They were the actual tapes of me speaking in Hala to that crowd of 1,000 people from the back of a truck. The actual BBC recording of me speaking to that crowd, the actual piece that I wanted. And they'd withheld it. It was totally fraudulent, dishonest withholding of disclosure, technically. So I'm now entitled to go before before a judge and summons the solicitor and Deborah Lipsat to explain what the withholding of this disclosure, and if they've got an explanation for it. And I actually did this. I got a hearing before a judge, a junior judge, and what's called an interlocutory hearing. The very next day, and her lawyers, in the meantime, have written me demanding to have their two tapes back, which they'd inadvertently inadvertently enclosed their tapes. I said, "Well, thank you very much for confirming that you inadvertently," and I did. "Yes, you're entitled to have them back. I'm not entitled to sit on them. However, I will return the tapes upon you giving me the undertaking that you will have the tapes in your possession when we come into court tomorrow for the hearing on my summons," which is what I did. I went to court next day before Junior Judge Master Trench, very nice judge. We had 13 interlocutory hearings, as they're called, and I won every single one against her lawyers. And the judge says it's quite plain that I have the 2 possible orders I'm going to ask him to make. The first order is that he now strikes out Deborah Lipsat's entire defence. That is the order that can actually be made as a punishment for withholding discovery. And this is such a blatant case. I mean, I had the actual letters that her lawyers had replied to me saying that they didn't have the tapes, they didn't know where they were, they couldn't help me. They actually had the tapes all along. So the judge can make that order, but he was a bit nervous. He knows by now it's going to be the trial of the millennium, as it's called. The trial of the millennium, and he doesn't want to make that order on his own, so he can't make that order. He says, what is the other order I want to make? I said, well, if you're not going to make that order, then I ask in the alternative then that you make an order that Deborah Lipstadt swears an affidavit on her discovery, which is the alternative order. She swears an affidavit on her discovery. Effectively, she has to swear a document saying that I do swear, therefore, that the list of discovery which I provided on such and such a date contains all the documents that I have that are relevant to the case, omits nothing, no fraudulent, no deceptions, nothing withheld, and it's full and fair and frank. Who was her lawyer fought tooth and nail against Deborah having to sign this order. She wasn't there in court, but he said it would not be fair for Deborah Lipstadt, who would not be in court. She, of course, was not to blame for this. So her lawyers were to blame for this. Her lawyers had made the accidental withholding of this discovery, and Deborah Lipstadt was not in any way to blame herself. And I said, as the judge is aware, as they themselves are aware, there's no daylight visible between the lawyers and their client in this case. And the judge agreed straight away. The lawyers for Deborah Lipstadt and Deborah Lipstadt are exactly one and the same people, and he therefore said, I therefore make that order. And he granted an order that Deborah Lipstadt therefore do now swear an affidavit. So she had to swear an affidavit. But this is not mentioned anywhere in the film, it's not mentioned anywhere. This is the reason why she didn't go in the witness box. Because you can't go behind, as they say, you can't go behind an order that is sworn on discovery. You can't challenge the content of an order that she swears on discovery. There's no way. You have to wait until you get her in the witness box. When you get her in the witness box, then one of your first questions can be, Professor Lipstadt, you've sworn this affidavit, is that true? Do you recognize it? Do you recognize your signature? You can have a lot of fun with that. But now I've got a number of documents in my hand which are not enclosed, which are not included in your affidavit, which are quite clearly should have been included in the. That's what they're frightened of, what I've got up my sleeve, and they dare not take the risk of putting their own client in the witness stand. However, if they had put her in the witness stand and I produced these documents, which should have been included in her original discovery, but she didn't, then of course she's committed perjury. That's the one thing they're terrified of. Because if she committed perjury, then they will not see their client again for the next 4 years. She will go to prison for 4 years. Yes, simple as that. So that's the first thing that she conceals. Second thing she conceals is the judge made no order for her costs. She was not awarded any costs. The publisher who published her book, they were allowed their costs. We had to pay £2 million costs. But the judge made no order for Deborah Lipstadt's costs. And her costs have been substantial. In fact, she had spent $13 million in court on her experts. 13 $13 million, yes.
As I understand, some of that money is Spielberg's money.
Well, the judge himself said these sums of money are obscene sums of money, should not have been spent. And the reason we know it is because Deborah Lipstadt could not hold her tongue. She went around the world, in New Zealand, Australia, Israel, other countries, and talked about the trial. She talked about the money, people who put out money for the trial, including Steven Spielberg and a whole host of Hollywood producers. They'd all dug deep into their pockets and provided her with money for the trial. And she also said something rather odd when she was in Israel. She said, my lawyers advised me that before the trial began, they would do everything they could to destabilize David Irving. Destabilize was the word she used. Very, very odd. I began to think, well, what did she do? Can I remember anything? Well, yes, I could. The trial was held, the trial began in January the 12th, 2000, January the 12th, 2000. Hermann Goering's birthday, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Hermann Goering's birthday.
In 2000.
January 12th, yes,
Yeah.
January 12th. And 4 months before that, we had suffered a family tragedy. My oldest daughter, Josephine, God rest her soul. She killed herself. She'd suffered a terrible accident. She had one arm, she'd lost an arm and lost a leg, and she was kept in a wheelchair the rest of her life. And she suffered a terrible accident. And she killed herself. So we had no father wants to have to go through having a funeral for his own daughter. But we held a beautiful funeral in Mayfair, and in September 1999, with music from Gabriel Fauré's Requiem Mass. Beautiful, beautiful music. I can't hear that music now without a chill running down my spine. And my brothers came, they were in the Royal Air Force, both of them. They both came back from the Royal Air Force, and my sisters and my secretaries, they came, and my assistants. My assistants who later, 10 days before the trial began, I said to them suddenly, on sudden impulse, I said, you two are going to be here during the trial for the next 3 or 4 months. They said, well, now you ask us. In fact, no, we're not going to be. They've been given major offers by unknown law firms. These kind of things happen. So they also came to this funeral, and we had a big reception in my flat afterwards. And unforgettable. The reception, the flat gradually emptied that evening, and I was left by myself in Mayfair, on the other side of Grosvenor Square. And the phone rang. The phone rang, and I pick up the phone, and the voice says, Mr. Irving, it's the morticians. You know, the undertakers. And I say, well, I recognize your voice, yes, because I knew them because they'd been in touch with me quite a lot. They had actually said right at the beginning, they said we were the morticians who were used for Admiral Nelson's funeral in 1806, the Battle of Trafalgar. They said we've just received a very expensive wreath. A wreath of white lilies and white roses, and it's cost a lot of money. And it's too late, of course, because the funeral was this morning, wasn't it? And I said, well, yes, you're right. I said, is there a note attached to the wreath? And they said, yes, it's a handwritten note. I said, in that case, you better send it round straight away so that I can write and thank the people concerned. And they sent it round by courier. Half an hour later, it comes to the front door, and it is a very expensive wreath of white roses and lilies. And I took a photograph of it. Because who knows? It's a wreath this evening, but tomorrow it's maybe a pipe bomb. Oh yes, my mind is already thinking something criminal has happened. Because the wreath I threw away, straight away. The actual note they had attached to it, the actual handwritten note, I remember the wording on it exactly. The wording on it had said, truly a merciful death, truly a merciful death. Signed, Philip Buhler and friends. Merciful death in German would be Gnadentod. As it would be the word used by the Germans for the euthanasia program, for the mercy killing program. And Philip Buhler, who had apparently signed the note, he hadn't signed it because Philip Buhler committed suicide in 1945. He was the head of the euthanasia program. It was somebody who's got a pretty detailed knowledge of the history of the Third Reich. Somebody who's got a pretty detailed knowledge of history, and somebody writing to somebody else with the same kind of knowledge who would understand what's being said.
Right.
It's saying, your daughter had it coming to her. Absolutely.
Wow.
And that was just one of the things they did. They did various other things right up to the time the trial began. So the outcome was inevitable. As my father said, British justice is the best that money can buy.
Justice is the best.
There was a great deal of money. It was $13 million went into court.
Yeah.
We had a few happy moments. We had one happy moment when the expert witness on the expert architect came to give evidence. Very nice guy. His name was Professor Robert Jan van Pelt. He came from the University of Waterloo in Canada, and he was a professor of architecture. all would have been okay had it not been for the American architectural firm that had privately written me weeks earlier that Professor Van Pelt wasn't an architect at all. He'd never started architecture. He'd not registered with any architectural body, so he was a charlatan. I satisfied myself. He came to the witness box and I said, well, Professor Van Pelt, I read your book and said, oh, very interesting. And you studied at the University of Van Leiden, didn't you? And he said, yes. And I said, what did you study? He said, well, I studied the cultural history of architecture. I said, you studied the cultural history of architecture, but you're not here to give evidence on the cultural history of architecture of Auschwitz, are you? You have a certain number, it's very low-level humour. You allow yourself from time to time. And he's slightly embarrassed, he says, no. And I said, in fact, are you a member of the Royal Institute of British Architects, the RIBA? And he said, no, I'm not. I said, are you a member of the Bund van Nederlandse Architecten? He said, well, no, that would be the Dutch body because he's Dutch. Are you a member of the Canadian body of architects? He says, no, I'm not. So I said, in other words, you're not a member of any Canadian body of architects? He says, no, I'm not. So I said, to go further, given that you're not a member of any Canadian professional body of architects, you're not entitled to call yourself an architect, are you? And I'm waiting for at this point, the judge to interrupt me and to say, you're asking the professor, we should disregard Professor Van Pelt's evidence. But the judge never says this. I don't know, but maybe I should have asked him, I don't know. That's one of the things I blame myself afterwards for, is that kind of thing asked. On another point, when in fact, I think go one stage further, I say not only would it be a criminal offence to call yourself an architect, but if you called yourself an architect, you'd be a bit of a charlatan, wouldn't you? I deliberately use the word charlatan because the Jews had used that about poor old Fred Reuchter, because he calls himself an engineer in Massachusetts where he's not registered as an engineer. The judge had interrupted me at one point on something else in Van Pelt because I said, Van Pelt, you've submitted an expert report of 400 or 500 pages, which I read with great interest, but the whole book is written rather like a book. You've actually written the manuscript, you've written this expert report like a book, you've given it, you've divided it into chapters, and you started each chapter with a motto from a poem or something. So is it your intention to publish this as a book? You've actually put your copyright at the beginning, copyright Jan Van Pelt. And at this point, the judge rather irritably interrupts me and he says, Mr. Irving, can you tell the court why you're asking these questions? I said, well, yes, willingly, my lord. I said, it become quite plain from my next question, Professor Van Pelt, can you tell the court what kind of prospects you would have had with this book of yours if you'd written a book coming to the exact opposite conclusion, right? That there were no gas chambers or something like that. And he said, well, no publisher would have looked at it. So I said, in other words, you had a commercial interest in writing this book. And the judge shut up at that point. So there are various matters like this. I mean, Van Pelt was allowed to testify as an architect on matters of architecture, but on matters, other matters too. He was allowed to testify on toxicology. He was allowed to testify on document authentication. All these things which he was not an expert on, but he was allowed to get away with it. And I should have intervened and have rather impatiently objected, but there we are. I was rather overawed about it all. That really is the end of the story. Until now, I'm still writing, I'm still standing, I've lost my home, I'm homeless. Yes, I'm homeless, because when I came down from Scotland, where I had a nice home for 3 years, I left Scotland because it's kind of cold. Inverness, where I was living, is the northernmost part, and it's
always cold in London.
It is very, very cold.
It's always cold in London. A damp cold.
And this was a big house that I'd taken a lease on, and I had 40 rooms, of which 39 rooms were empty and had to be heated.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, there we are.
Oh, why?
So I drove back south on May the 1st, and I'm looking for a new property now. And I'm carrying on. I've got three books still to write. I've got 3 books still to write. I've got the 3rd volume of Winston Churchill, which will come out, got the Himmler book to finish, and after that I got memoirs, all of which are written. Rough.
Oh, really? You got the memoirs written too?
Yeah. My older brother, who was 8 years older than me, before he died, he said one thing. He said, you've got to watch out, because as you get older, you think you can do it. When the time comes, you find you can't do it. Yeah.
It's something to worry about. It's something to worry about.
I'm not worried about that, because I've done it. I've done it. I've done all the heavy lifting.
What's in your place in Florida? Is that just an apartment in Florida, or just a address, or just what is that then?
I rent properties down in Key West.
Key West, yeah.
I just rented these properties from a friend. He unfortunately came into financial difficulties about 5 or 10 years ago with the Bank of America, and he locked off his properties, I think. So he's not allowed to make special deals anymore, which he was making with me. But I never had property there anyway.
Yeah, but is that a home of sorts?
I brought all my property down, 10 tons of stuff down from Scotland, put it all in storage.
Oh, I say, yeah, where are all your records? You finally got everything back,
yep,
didn't you?
Yep. No, not
well,
everything.
Almost everything.
A lot of stuff came back. Anyway, let me just say, if you want to have books or buy books or whatever, everything's on special offer, 20% off everything. Except some things even more. If you find a book which is there and you kind of soft cover, and these DVDs, $10 each, whatever.
Okay.
I take cash. I take cash, credit cards, checks, promises to pay. Promises to pay.
This is just for travel, okay? Okay, here, I hope it's travel.
Metal.
Now let's see.
That's not metal. That's not. Oh.
I'm sorry to hear about all your troubles. I'm sorry to hear about all your troubles.
Oh, incredible.
No, they're not incredible. What would life be if one didn't have troubles to withstand? And they would be worse troubles if
this is the man from all seasons. He's going to go down in history as one of the great ones. One of the enduring ones.
There should be 10 videos if you want to see more than you've seen down in the car. 10 or 12.
I really enjoyed your one discussion I saw on YouTube where you talked about Rudolf Hess and how he tried to stop World War II. Was that based on this book?
Yep. And the new edition of that book, which isn't that one, the new edition is going to be 2 extra lines identifying the man who killed him.
Oh,
by name.
You found out? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He's a black GI called Jordan. He's strangled Rudolf Hess using his tie, his necktie, the GI's tie. And the truth was so embarrassing that both the British Foreign Office and the American State Department hushed it up, and they put out a different version. But that's what actually happened.
Was he hired to do it?
No.
No. Okay.
Just he had had an increasing rows with Rudolf Hess over the previous weeks. Rudolf Hess had asked for this black guard to be withdrawn, but of course the prison governor refused to toe the line. And it was a very sad way to go, and I was very sorry for him. I heard about the news. I was in a taxi and coming back from Heathrow Airport. I heard the news in the taxi driver's radio that Rudolf Hess was died, and the next day, straight away, the Daily Mail claimed that he had been killed. He had been murdered, but then they were sat on straight away. So when I went to publish the facts, and what I'm doing there is putting the onus on him then to sue for libel if he wants to.
Okay.
But we've got pretty good evidence there.
Wow. And so do you have a new edition of this?
Yeah. The book Accident, which you just looked at, and the other one, The Rise and Fall of the German Air Force, the 2 books you don't have.
I have the old edition.
Rise and Fall of the German Air Force is one you don't have. The reason you don't have that is because it has been first printed now. I was getting it ready for print throughout the winter. I had it printed then, and it was delivered to me in Richmond. It was delivered to me 3 days after I was in Richmond, so I had to go back to Richmond to collect it, the first print. So Accident, which is the book on the killing of the Polish Prime Minister, which was very convenient for the British.
And I keep answering and nothing happens.
What's your thoughts on Trump as far as like the Jewish connection to him? Because I know he's got a.
Well, that worries me. That worries me.
Yeah.
The Germans have a saying that you cannot jump over your own shadow, and I think Donald Trump is gradually going to find that out.
Yeah.
That he's never getting rid of the Jews. He's never going to get rid of them. He's got them. He's got the. He's caught the plague.
Aren't they trying to do to Trump, or essentially they tried to do to you all this year, just drive you out of your mind?
Yep.
Isn't that what they're doing now with that media? And if you look at the CEOs of all the media, 90%,
Oh yes.
if not 100, are Jewish.
Yes.
They're all Jewish CEOs.
Yes. I'm astonished that the American public puts up with it.
Well, how does I'm going to talk about it as culture.
Yeah.
What has the white culture? They're putting up with everything. They're being trashed by everybody, and they're taking it.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, how can Muslims, let's say, go into Britain, set up, or even the Pakistanis, they come up and they have a section that no one else can go into in your country. I mean, how do we stand for this country?
When I was born in 1938, England was a totally different place. That's one reason why I like Inverness when you go up there. This reminds you of England as was. But there we are. The English people put up with it, and any attempts to stand up against it, and you get screamed at.
In Sweden, where my wife comes from, the videotapes was going on there. It's a disaster.
They would.
And the police will not even go in the area themselves.
Yep.
Can we help you load some of this stuff up here?
Yes, yes.
Because you didn't bring a helper with you, did you?
I didn't know.
No.
That's okay.